We are now going to go on to the next case, and David Sabina from UC probably needs no introduction as he's been doing SR&ED since 1994 and is the main driving force behind these yearly stakeholder events. David's published in R&D tax issues for professional accounting bodies and industry. As a primary development partner of rdbase.net, he works with accounting, tax, legal, patent, market development, and investment specialists to coordinate development efforts and commercialize intellectual property. Let me see if I can get to right here. So with that, Dave, if you don't mind taking it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Earl. Okay, I'll jump right into Dazzim. What we have here in the slideshow in general is a case summary where we've cross-referenced the actual paragraph questions from the tax court judgment itself. So you can follow it through or double-check things if you're interested. Okay, so basically the case is a company that provides software as a service. They have a platform, and they filed a partially successful claim for the 2018 taxation year. So basically, the CRA originally allowed about $8,000 of a $278,000 claim. They subsequently allowed several what they call sub-projects, or we might call it activities, supporting activities within the project totaling $61,000. And the remaining, what they call sub-project 1, was the lion's share of the costs, or around almost $210,000. And it was related to getting components to integrate effectively. Okay? So effectively, the overall project was to create a metadata architecture. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to take an application from Windows to a cloud application and had several activities, or what the CRA called sub-projects within that. So one of the key sub-projects and one of the things that fell into contention here was really the use of how to get the metadata to have dynamic fields. And there was thousands apply the metadata architecture, the tool chain overhead exploded and caused crashes. So the interaction of different components between the core components, React, Redux, stylized components, and what they call the high order components were interacting in a way that wasn't isolated and which they couldn't figure out. Okay, so basically what we have here is a very complicated slide, but it gives an overview of the project itself and the related activity. The activity being the React performance integration that was in dispute. So the technological uncertainty at a high level that was accepted by the CRA initially was whether we can create a metadata-driven architecture to deliver the acceptable performance. And the sub-project, the issue that they had a problem with was really work related to the specific tool combinations and activities related to providing that metadata architecture within a reasonable time frame. Okay. So the original technical challenge of the activity was that related to the project was to create a renderable time frame of 300 milliseconds versus the current time frame of 1300 milliseconds, which would seem to be unacceptable. Ultimately, they were able to achieve a reduction to 692 milliseconds, but this was still seemed to be a business failure, so it didn't meet the business criteria, although it was a technological advancement in that they determined some of the issues causing it. The experimentation that was noted to within the case itself was work that first started on doing small optimizations, which resulted in roughly a 10% improvement. Then they analyzed component interactions. They consulted public domain information from GitHub, other solutions. They looked at React diagnostic and talked to the developers of the React platform itself who couldn't solve their issues here. And then they built custom diagnostic tools to identify which nodes were causing the problems. Through this and modifying source code, they were able to reduce the response time to 775 milliseconds, and then through additional focus on the higher components, they were able to reduce it to 692 milliseconds, but still concluded that that was not successful from a business standpoint. Okay. So some of the court's key findings is that there was system uncertainty due to the tool chain interaction. And most importantly, that we wanted to evaluate the eligibility at the project rather than the activity level, okay? And that ultimately the work on what we call subproject 1 was more than just debugging. It was basically a systematic search or activity that was directly in support of the project itself. So the courts felt that you should adjust or evaluate the project holistically, the entire project within the objectives, not each activity separately. As long as the activity was supporting achievement of the overall objectives and resolving the stated technological uncertainty, it was eligible. Okay, so the activity was actually necessary for the project as a whole. So ultimately, why the case one, several factors, is that the
recording stopped.
Sorry. So some of the key factors were that there was the architectural context itself of the different components being integrated created technological uncertainty that wasn't routine, that wasn't readily available solutions. The CRA expert in this case wasn't familiar with those components or the specific limitations, so that added to the claimant's favor, and that ultimately they were able to provide metrics, response times, things like that, measurable components, so things that are systematic in order to support the eligibility. Okay, so some of the key lessons and how we can apply this to our own claims are you want to show how sub-projects or activities support the overall project objectives. You want to capture hypothesis and measurements, so things like more node counts, response times, things like that. Very important to document public domain search responses and why they're not applicable. And it illustrates that a modern framework, even modern frameworks can create technological uncertainty when we try to integrate them. Okay.
Thank you, David.